For gamers, the graphics card is often the most expensive part in their rig. This isn't a new trend. Despite CPU's job being absolutely vital, for those looking for the fastest frame rates, the highest resolution, plonking the majority of your cash onto the graphics card is by far the most popular choice. For as resolutions increase, the graphics card workload increases exponentially.
Nvidia's Pascal architecture debuted on the desktop mid-2016 with the release of the then fastest SKU, the GeForce GTX 1080, using the GP104 graphics core. But things have changed considerably since then, and the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti has now taken the top spot away. This ignores, of course, the existence of the Titan cards for the moment. The GP102 core found inside the GTX 1080 Ti features 40% more Cuda cores compared to the vanilla 1080, and Nvidia and the vendors such as MSI are eager to market the Ti as a more capable 4K GPU. But now that the 1080 Ti has been on the market since March of 2017, vendors are able to cherry pick the best quality silicon and marry that up with high quality components for custom cards, and these cards far exceed the clock capabilities, noise levels and thermals of the reference cards or Nvidia's own Founders Edition, if you prefer.
My name's Paul, and in this Red Gaming Theatre.com video we're going to be reviewing MSI's GeForce GTX 1080 Ti Gaming X Trio graphics card. Now do know that this is not a sponsored video. We were sent this graphics card for purposes of review, however it has since gone back to MSI and thus all opinions are our own.
And we're going to proceed assuming you've got a fairly decent understanding of the Pascal architecture, given that we've discussed it multiple times now, and instead focus our attention on the performance and the value of the card. If you do want more information on Pascal, you can check out one of our other videos, which we'll link in the video description. Let me be the first to tell you, if you've any notion of putting this card inside a small form factor build, you can forget it. The Trio is huge, measuring 325mm in length, 48 in width, and finally 140mm in height. It's not exactly light either, weighing just short of 1500 grams or about 3.3 pounds, and that's just for the GPU. Starting things out with the full-sized black nickel-plated backplate bolted onto the PCB. MSI's Dragon, of course, makes its obligatory appearance on the far side of the GPU, the side furthest from the rear I/O ports, and at the bottom is a multicoloured LED strip and the MSI logo. On the front of the GPU are 3 Torx 2.0 fans, designed with double ball bearings, which, at least in theory, increases the lifespan. These fans are probably one of the most important features of the card, as they allow the GPU to run virtually silently, even under heavy gaming loads. And the fans stop spinning while the GPU is running idle, such as the desktop or basic web browsing, and indeed they'll remain off while the card is sitting below the 60-degree threshold. But even when they do whir away, they're rarely intrusive, well left to their auto settings.
Even with an open bench with the graphics card just a couple of feet away from me, noise levels with the fans on auto was indistinguishable from the CPU. Indeed, that's really what MSI seem to be aiming for with this card. Virtually silent operation, and they succeed admirably.
Under the trio of fans is a plethora of aluminium fins, with 6 heat pipes, although 2 of those are the supersized variety. Blacks, dark greys with hints of silver and reds are the order of the day. MSI were clearly designing the card with a less bold colour scheme in mind, particularly compared to the Gaming X products which we've reviewed in the past. If we had to hazard a guess, it's so that the card fits better in a wider variety of case schemes. At the card's rear, you have 2 display ports 1.4, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, and finally a single dual-link DVI connector. The card demands 2 8-pin power connectors for operation, a fair enough sacrifice to the frame rate gods, I'm sure you'll agree. In terms of clock speed, the core runs at 1683 MHz with 11GB of GDDR5X memory, hitting 11,124 MHz. This is assuming, however, you've got it switched to overclock mode. In regular gaming mode, the clocks are a little less aggressive, running at 1657 for boost core and 11,016 MHz for memory. These clocks aren't cranked as high as some cards, particularly some of the custom GTX 1080 vanillas, but there are a few things to take into consideration. The first is that the card was clearly designed with noise levels in mind, and the second is that raw clock speeds which were achieved in boost are very different to the rated numbers. Indeed, we routinely had the trio hitting way north of 1900 MHz on the core, with about 2 GHz sustained for long periods of time being pretty damn common, and made to be pretty constant if you tweak the power limits of the GPU. What we have here then is a clear example of Pascal Boost 3.0 running at full swing, taking advantage of the thermal headroom of MSI's gaming trio affords. For memory, we managed to crank the clocks up to an additional 700 MHz over stock without any crashes or stability problems, offering you a pretty nice free performance boost. The beauty of all this, well, despite the clocks nudging north of 2 GHz on the core, and the memory overclock also in place, heat and noise was still minimal. Indeed, once again on an open rig, it was hard to discern the difference between the light buzzing of the Corsair AIO we were using for the CPU and the subtle sounds of the Trio's fans whirring away at a rather sedate speed. Indeed, under stress testing we rarely peaked over the high 60s, with noise levels around the 32 dB range. Almost totally silent, with low coil whine thanks to high quality chokes, SFC, super ferrite chokes, which would be one of the key reasons for this.
For other specs of the card, they're very typical for a GeForce GTX 1080 Ti. You're looking at the GP102 350A1 graphics core. It has 3584 Cuda cores, 222 texture mapping units, and 88 ROPs.
Compare this to the 2560 Cuda cores, 160 TMUs, and 64 ROPs of a vanilla GTX 1080, and it's clear why the Ti is so much faster than its brother.
The GeForce GTX 1080 Ti is without question the fastest graphics card for consumers currently on sale. In fact, unless you're going to go and discuss like one of the Titan graphics cards, this card is absolutely insane. Furthermore, for owners of anything less than a 1440p display, this card is most likely going to be a waste.
Owners of 1080p displays who possibly will be upgrading in the near future could certainly employ downsampling, but high refresh rate 1440p screens or driving a single 4K screen is rarely where these cards separate themselves from other graphics solutions. We didn't run 1080p results on this particular card for this simple reason. There just isn't a usage scenario where native 1080p makes a great deal of sense for the card. While yes, gamers running high refresh rate 1080p screens might in theory find justification of the card, the issue is that you're typically at the whim of the CPU. And any micro stutter or intense physics calculations, open world games such as The Witcher 3 or intense scenes in GTA 5 and Crysis 3 can nuke much of this advantage. Essentially, you'll just be CPU bound in a lot of titles, making it a great card for CPU benching, if nothing else. Rise of the Tomb Raider at 4K reaches 60 FPS mark with everything maxed out. Hitman at 4K reaches mid-70s with its built-in benchmark. The open world brilliance of The Witcher 3 running at 4K with no hairworks enabled can be yours to explore at 65 frames a second, and even the notoriously less optimized games such as Batman Arkham Knight runs at 79 frames a second, at average at 4K with the GTX 1080 Ti Trio. But there are some games which just can't quite reach and maintain 60 FPS, even on the GTX 1080 Ti. This isn't necessarily the fault of the Trio or any GTX 1080 Ti, it's just they're incredibly demanding games and are pushing the limits of current technology.
But there are games which simply cannot maintain 60 FPS even on a GTX 1080 Ti. This isn't a fault of the Trio or the GTX 1080 Ti as a whole when it regards to the architecture, it's just that these games are incredibly punishing. Shadow of War, for example, just can't quite maintain 60 FPS, and even the older Crysis 3, specifically the infamous Welcome to the Jungle level with its immense amount of foliage and textures and all of the other graphical assets, is incredibly punishing for the graphics card.
The visual quality and frame rates here are several steps above anything else in the market, obliterating the performance of even the GTX 1080. Compare the 1080s barely hitting 40 frames per second in Crysis 3 compared to around 55 of the 1080 Ti. But it does show that for owners of a 4K screen, you might need to accept the odd frame rate dip, lower visual settings, particularly anti-aliasing, or possibly invest in, yeah that's right, a second card. Unfortunately, we only had a single GTX 1080 to test with, but still. For owners looking to rock high frame rates of 1440p, the 1080 Ti is a card without any equal. with games such as Crysis 3 running way north of 100 frames per second and Rise of the Tomb Raider regularly peaking at 120 frames per second. For some products we need to go into a lot more details. For example, in our upcoming Threadripper 1950X review, there's a lot more ground we need to cover. Because Threadripper isn't just needed for a lot of customers, or there are other alternative products such as the Skylight X lineup, which might make more sense for some customers. Not so for the high resolution gaming options. Nothing quite touches the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti at this point on the market. From a performance standpoint, there's literally nothing on the market short of the considerably more expensive Titan, which offers this level of gaming performance. On AMD's side, Vega 64 does a pretty decent job of fending off the vanilla 1080, but the sheer might of the 1080 Ti just can't be countered by the red team. At least, not yet. Who knows what next year will bring from competition though. And thus, if you're looking for a virtually silent graphics card, the Trio is perfect. There are faster options available at stock operation, but the near silent operation of this card is a big selling point. And while of course we can't guarantee overclocking, we'd be surprised if you didn't tickle 2 GHz from the core from this card thanks to Boost 3.0 with a bit of subtle tweaking. Ultimately, there are only a few things which stop us from heartily recommending this card to everyone. The first is that it's expensive, and for a good reason. The build quality and components inside this thing are worth the cash, as is the performance, but for over 750 Great British pounds, for any graphics card is rich for a lot of people. It's a very high-end investment. The second issue is of course you're dealing with a GPU architecture, Pascal, which has been out for some 18 months now, and we're fully expecting Nvidia to announce a successor at some time or another. Maybe not so much in the distant future. Even if it's not January CES, surely Nvidia won't keep us waiting much longer than that, right? So your GTX 1080 Ti Trio might have a relatively short time of being the best, but of course it's also possible that with no real competition for the bleeding high end, Nvidia might just wait to counter AMD at a later date. And so, the usual advice rings true here. Waiting can be the best decision if a new component is on the verge of being released, but guessing a release date several months into the future is often fruitless, especially if you need a graphics card now. And that's really it. If you have the money and need a GPU or 2 of them to drive a high resolution display, we can't really see any reason to not heartily recommend MSI's gaming Trio. Excellent build quality, great features and solid operation. It's a winner. With that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Feel free to take a look at our Patreon if you wish to support us. The link of course is in the video description. Take care of yourselves and bye for now.